Hey everyone, this is David Pike, the Motorcity Mechanic. Now today's video is part one of a two-part series on disassembling the cylinder head for that PT Cruiser. Now everything you're going to see in this video will apply to other vehicles, so if you don't own a PT Cruiser, don't worry, make sure to check the video out because you might just learn something. In today's video, we're going to be talking about disassembling the cylinder head. We're going to cover a lot of different aspects, everything from the surface that we're working on and how it's important to find something that won't scratch the cylinder head, to cleaning and prepping the surface between the head and the block. Then we're going to move over to a thorough visual inspection, mainly looking for cracks. And then we're also going to check to make sure that the head's not warped. And that's a big one there. And then I'm going to show you two different tools for compressing the valve springs. And then we're going to actually use those tools and we're going to talk about the pros and cons for each one. And once we start disassembling everything, I want to show you something that's pretty cheap for actually organizing everything that we take off and how you can label it so you know exactly where each one of them goes. So for now, let's go ahead and start talking about the surface that we're going to be working on. Now before we get started with the cylinder head, I want to talk about something that I think a lot of people overlook, and that's the surface that they're going to be working on. First off, it's got to be strong enough and sturdy enough to support the weight of the cylinder head. Some of them can get pretty heavy. Now the other thing is we want a smooth and soft working surface. So what I want to do is I want to grab a fender cover, you can grab a towel, whatever you got laying around, fold it a few times, get you something soft. Because the last thing you want to do is scratch one of the sealing surfaces. We're not so much worried about the area that the valve cover makes contact with. What we're really concerned about is when we're working on it and rotating it around that we don't scratch this surface right here where the cylinder head mates up with the engine block. Now the next thing we want to do is to go ahead and clean the surface of the cylinder head where the head gasket makes contact. That's going to give us a chance to do a visual inspection. We'll be able to see everything. We'll be able to check to make sure the cylinder head's not warped and also make sure that there are no cracks between the valves, because the last thing we want to do is replace the valves and lap them and install them and find out that we've got a damaged cylinder head. Now in order to clean it, you want to stay away from anything metal. No carbide bits, no putty knives, no chisels, no razor blades. You want to stay away from those roll-lock pads as well. Those can cause issues unless you know what you're doing with them. Now one of these Scotch pads right here is just perfect for what we're going to be doing. We're going to grab a little bit of WD-40, spray it around the perimeter. We're just going to go back in circular motions, cleaning up any old gasket surfaces. So now that we've got the cylinder head cleaned, we can now move over to checking to make sure the cylinder head's not warped. By cleaning it, we remove any kind of buildup of any kind of material between the surfaces here. So when we lay our special tool down in a minute, we don't have to worry about there being any inaccurate readings because of that buildup. So now that we get it perfectly cleaned, now we can check for it being warped. Now in order to do that, we need a special tool. Now this is made by all the big name tool companies, Mac, Snap-on, Matco, all of them offer this. And there's some other companies as well online. And no, this is not just a straight piece of metal that's cut to length. This thing is machined and ground down to where there is a perfect edge on both sides. Perfectly straight, that is. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay it both diagonal this way, and then straight across the middle. And at the same time, we're going to grab a feeler gauge. We're going to grab different sizes. We're going to start small. We're going to work up under the edge and see if it goes up under it. If it goes up under it easily, we'll move up to the next one. Once we get some drag on it, then we'll stop and then we'll see what the measurement is. Now we don't want to exceed 0.004, that's 4/1000ths of an inch. Anything beyond that, you're going to have to take the cylinder head to a machine shop and they're going to have to grind it down perfectly smooth. So I'm going to start with a lower size feeler gauge. In this case we're going 0.002, that's 0.002. I'm going to press down on the tool and support it so it doesn't fall over. Grab that feeler gauge and see if it easily slides up under, and it does. So we can go on down the length and check that. Once again, we'll do it at an angle. Now being that it's slid up under, what we're going to do is we're going to move over to the next size. Once again, the 2 does fit. Remember, we don't want to go past 4. So we'll jump up to the next size, which is 3/1000. Same thing, support the tool, try to slide it up under. I'm starting to feel some drag. You can actually hear it too. 3 starts getting tighter on the outer edges. So 3 is real close. So what we'll do is we'll try 4 and then make sure that that has the drag that we're looking for. So let's go ahead and move over to the next size filler gauge. That's the 4/1000 right here, 0.004. Remember, anything beyond this means the cylinder head has to be checked by a machine shop and possibly shaved or replaced. So we'll check it again right here in the center. And it's actually starting to hit and drag. I'm going to have to use a little bit of force to get it up under. So most likely our reading is anywhere between 3 and 4/1000 of an inch. So now that we've measured and we found that the gap here is within specs, we need to go ahead and recheck everything else as well. Go between each one of the cylinders once again, get the tool diagonal both ways to make sure there's no irregular areas of the cylinder head. It's better to check now than it is to check later after you have to take the head back apart for a second time. Now this is the perfect time to do a good visual inspection. You mainly want to look between the valves or close to where the spark plug is to see if you see any hairline cracks around the perimeter. Make sure you check each one of the cylinders, look at it real closely, clean it up if you need to, and just go on down the line and make sure you don't see anything wrong. Now in order to remove the valves, we're going to have to compress the valve spring. So that means we need a special tool. Now I've got 2 different versions right here laid out in front of us. The one on the left is from Amazon. It's sold by 20 different companies and it's got 20 different names on it. The only real difference is the color of the case. This one's red, there's yellows, there's blues, but if you look at the pictures you can tell they're pretty much identical. Now the way this operates is you screw in one side to get your depth right and then you screw in the other side to compress the valve spring. It's basically a glorified C-clamp. Now it's made for light duty work. You don't want to use it for anything big or high performance because it'll start bending out. It's not made for it. But on the PT it'll work fine. Once again, you're only spending $20 on this one. Now the other style that's on the market is the spring loaded type. You still set your depths using the little screw adjusters here and here. But when you get ready to compress the valve spring, you're going to squeeze in here and it rotates the assembly down. Now this is once again made by OTC. This is their part number 4572 and you'll pick up something like this for around $50 or $60. So the choice is pretty much up to you which one you want to use. This is a little more heavier duty. You can use it on other vehicles as well, such as anything that's got any high performance engine, stuff like that. It's built for that. The difference is having to clamp it down. That can be a little more difficult at times versus just screwing in on a handle on that one. So you've got options. So to begin with, we're going to use the Chinese version and see how well it works, and we even try the OTC version so that way you get a feel for both different tools to see which one might work well for you. Now in order for this tool to work properly, we've got to figure out which size adapter we're going to be using. Now on the valve spring side, we need to find the adapter that's going to fit this retaining plate perfectly. If we go too small, we're not going to have enough room to access the keepers. If we go too large, then it's not going to hold on or it might slip off that retainer. So we grabbed the largest one in the kit, slide it over, and that's actually a pretty good fit right there. We've got the access to the keepers like we mentioned, and it's also holding onto that retaining plate like we like. Now on the valve side, we need to find an adapter to sit in the center here. We don't want to go too small. Obviously we can't go too large because the largest adapter is being used for the spring side. So we'll step it down to the next size. As you can see, it's going to sit just like this. It's going to make contact without damaging that valve. It's going to fit perfectly for what we're going to be using. Now one of those threaded shafts is different than the other. If you look up here near the top, you'll see there's a hole. And that hole is for a handle to get inserted into. And that's how we're going to be tightening down the tool. So now we're ready to install both adapters onto the tool. Remember that the threaded side here that has the handle, that's the side we're going to make contact with the valve spring. We're going to get that adapter and just slide it on the end till it bottoms out. We're going to do the same thing on the end that makes contact with the valve. So now that we've got both the threaded shafts and both of the adapters installed, we're ready to start using the tool. Now I want to basically show you what we're going to be doing here. I've got a valve and valve spring laid out here. As you can see, largest adapter on the retaining plate, smaller on the bottom of the valve. What we're going to be doing is compressing this valve spring right here, because in order to remove the valve, we've got to compress this to get to a set of keepers, and I'll show you that. Now with the tool installed, as we're tightening down on that handle, the adapter is going to push down on this retaining plate and start compressing the spring. As we tighten down further and further and further, we start getting access to the keepers. The keepers is what keeps everything in place. They're basically two pieces of metal, one on both sides, kind of acting like a clamshell, and they form a wedge. That wedge interlocks with that retaining plate. Once those are exposed, we can get a pocket magnet. We can actually start pulling off the keepers. At that point, we can just lift up, releasing the tool, unthreading it, and then remove the valve spring. So now that the tool is completely assembled, we're ready to move over to actually compressing the valve spring. So we're going to grab the side that's got the handle on it and position it to where it's on top of the valve spring retainer. Now we're going to jump over to the other side and make sure it's lined up with the valve before we go tightening it down. Now that we've got everything lined up, now we can go ahead and start tightening it down. Eventually everything should start centering itself. So we'll just keep tightening down until we finally start getting that retaining plate down low enough to where you can get to those keepers that I pointed out earlier. And the best thing for getting those off is actually your pocket magnet. You can actually probably grab both of them at the same time. Now if the keepers are removed, we can go ahead and back off on the tool. So now we can grab the retainer and the valve spring. Now at this point all you got to do is push down on the valve and pull it through the head. So now that we've got that first valve spring removed, now we got to start thinking about organizing everything, because soon we're going to have a pile of parts and we need to know exactly where they went. What I'm talking about is the 16 valves, the valve springs, the retainers, and the 32 keepers. First, we don't want to lose them, and second, some of them need to go in the exact same position that they came out of, especially when we're going back with the new valves and we've cleaned up the old ones and we're lapping them. They've got to go in the exact specific cylinder, and whether or not it was the left or right intake port. Now the best way that I've found to keep up with that is go to your local Walmart, go into the cooking section, and find one of these 88-cent muffin trays. That's going to give us room to actually store all those components. We can actually write down in the bottom of here of what went where. Now I know looking at this we've only got room for 6 and we've got what, a total of 16? But that's fine. You just go back then and buy you another one, and then you buy you another one. And now you've got plenty of places to store all the parts so you don't lose anything. So now that we've got something to organize everything in, we've got to come up with a way of identifying where we're putting what. Now this is what works best for me. So let's look at these 4 areas right here. Let's just say that's possibly cylinder 1, right? We've got 4 valves. So I want to mark what cylinder this is going to be. We've got a 1, 1, 1, and 1. Now I need to separate my intake valve. I've got a left and a right. So let's go ahead and go left intake, right intake. Same thing for the exhaust valves. So I've got a left exhaust, and then I've got a right exhaust. And then what I can do is I can go over here and start for cylinder number 2. Same thing, cylinder 2, left intake, cylinder 2, left exhaust. So when I get my next muffin tin, I can just continue on down the line. So when you're done, you'll have a total of 16 storage compartments for both the valves, the springs, the keepers, and everything else. And you will have spent less than $3. So now when we remove a valve, all we got to do is match it up to the corresponding location. And now we've got a place to keep it and all the other related items. Now if you remember, in the beginning I gave you 2 different styles of valve spring compressors that you could use. We've already demonstrated the cheaper Chinese version, and what I want to do is jump over to the alternative that I showed, and that's the OTC 4572. Now looking at this OTC version, you can see that there are some similarities between this and the other tool that we showed. You do have an adjustment right here where we make contact with the valve inside the combustion chamber area of the head. And then up here we've got the portion that makes contact with the valve spring. Now your adapters are already included on the tool. On the valve spring side of the tool, you've got a larger and smaller size adapter. So what you've got to do is just double check the size of these, see which one's going to work for you, and make sure you've got it on this side of the tool. For this cylinder head, we're going to be using a larger adapter. Now the biggest difference between the two tools is the manner in which that we're going to be compressing the valve spring. On the previous version, what we did is we threaded in 2 shafts. Once it started touching, then we started tightening up the T-handle on the side of the valve spring. And as you saw, it gave us room and access to the keeper so we could release the valve spring from the valve. Now on the OTC version, we're doing something a little bit different. We do have some presets here, both on the valve side and the valve spring side. They get the tool kind of set up, ready to be used. Once we're at that point, we're going to grab the handle, and we're going to close or collapse the tool. And as we do that, as you can see, we're going to be compressing the valve spring. So once you spend the time to set this tool up, it'll be faster and faster for the next one. So we don't have to thread in that T-handle like the other tool, in and out, and keep repeating this over and over. Once this tool's set up, all we've got to do is squeeze and release the tool on each one of the valves in order to get to the keepers. Now before you can use the tool, you need to go ahead and preset everything. Play around with it, put it on the cylinder head, start adjusting it, because you got to get to a point where you can actually squeeze that handle. If it's too far out, you can't squeeze it enough. If it's too far in, it's not going to completely compress the valve spring. So play around to where you can actually start feeling that valve spring collapse. At that point, you've got the tool set up and you're ready to start using it. So now we've got everything pre-adjusted, we can go ahead and release the tool and start installing it on the head. So make sure the end of the shaft actually lines up with the center of that valve. And as we squeeze the handle, we start bringing this adapter closer to this valve spring. And then we squeeze down. And we get access to the keepers. Now remember, like I told you before, depending on how fast you do this, the keepers can fall off. You're not really controlling it like on the cheaper tool. This, you've got one fluid motion going down, so be prepared so you don't lose these. So we can grab a pocket magnet, start picking up the keepers one at a time. Now all we got to do is release the tool slowly so that we can get the retaining plate and valve spring off. Just take your time, back it off, and lift the tool off. And now we can reach in, grab that retaining plate and valve spring. So I've showed you 2 different tools that you can use for compressing the valve springs. Both have pros and cons. You've got slow and steady over here, but only works for light duty. And then you've got something that can work on pretty much every other vehicle, but you got to be careful of that kind of spring-loaded handle, because the name of the game is don't lose the keepers. Those little things will just fly off and go anywhere, and then you're going to have to struggle trying to find them or buying some new ones. So like I said, the price point isn't that much different, so it's up to you. And once again, if your local parts store has one as your loaner tool program, use their tool, bring it back, and that way you don't have to buy anything. Because this is a tool you may not use that often. So that brings us to the end of this video. Now in part 2, what we're going to be covering is the removal of the old valve stem seals. There's a special tool that you can buy on Amazon for like $27 that will reach down into the tight areas, and we can actually remove the old seals. At that point, we're going to clean up the old intake valves. We're going to throw away the exhaust valves because if you remember correctly, they're bent. And then we're going to lap both the intake and exhaust valves and get them prepped and ready to be reinstalled. And then we're going to use that same special tool to reinstall the new valve stem seals. At that point, we're ready to compress the valve springs, install the keepers, retaining plates, and at that point we've reinstalled everything and the head is prepped and ready to be installed on the block. So make sure to click on that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that way you get notified instantly when that video is uploaded. So if you like this video, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up on YouTube. Don't forget you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you got any comments or questions about anything you saw in today's video, you can email me at david@motorcitymechanic.com. Also, if you like to shop on Amazon, please make sure to use the link that's in the description below this video. And any purchases that you make will help support this channel. Once again, everybody, thanks for watching.